Hi, I'm Barbara Hodgson, and once again I'm reaching out to past players, administrators and supporters of the Nelson Rugby Football Club who are kindly giving us an historical glimpse into their family's involvement with the club, and more importantly to acknowledge their much valued contribution during their time. So today, the 10th of December 2019, I'm talking with Caterina Marshall, who is the youngest and only surviving offspring of Frank and May Gargiulo's family of 10 children. It's all about this Gargiulo's family immense contribution to the Nelson Rugby Football Club through the efforts of their 4 sons, Dudley, Anton, Leon and Lick. But also not to forget the huge support from their dad, as well their mother and 4 sisters. Also involved in this informal interview is Caterina's son Philip Marshall, about his own time spent with the club, but as well the surprising connection to the Nelson Club through his dad, Peter Marshall. Right, Caterina, first I want to talk to you about your mum and dad, Frank and May, who honestly really were one of the great Nelson Rugby Football Club families. So exactly where did your parents originate from?
Francesco came from Sorrento in Italy in 1912, and my mother immigrated from England and she arrived in Nelson in 1905.
Okay.
Francesco had been sent out, I think, because he'd been a bit of a naughty boy over there. And he had his sister, Mrs. Sanazaro, Auntie Conchetta, living in Nelson, and they had a tomato garden that in Milton Street, which is on the site of the Milton Chalet.
Okay, yeah,
now.
I know where that is, yeah.
Yes, and he obviously was taken, she took him under her wing.
So he became a tomato
Yes.
grower.
Well, he did
well.
other jobs, of course, before that, but then he went in tomato growing with Billy Monopoly.
Okay.
And they bought a section in Hardy Street,
Okay.
at the top end of Hardy Street, and started, I think he started Dad off, if you know what I mean, gave him a helping hand. And
So they weren't partners, he basically
yes, he
he
basically, yes, I think set Dad up,
Yeah.
and they may have worked together for a little while, I'm not sure, but yes, and that was where we ended up. We had our family home in that part of the woods, and then of course the garden grew to half a dozen glass houses that were mostly built by my brother Dudley.
Okay.
Yes, he worked very, very hard, and Anthony I think helped, but they were the couple of carpenters with the, you know, more skills. When
he met your mum, was
Yes.
he hadn't, it was only after you met your mum when they got married that they actually started up the garden then, or was he,
I think,
did he establish that
yes,
before?
I think he'd probably met Mum by that stage, and I think he'd done other jobs, probably in Nelson. I remember at one stage he was working in a fish shop for Ecolanos.
Yeah.
Yes, so once he got underway with the tomato growing, that's where we all ended up, and sons and...
What was it like growing up in a large, hard working tomato growing family?
Well,
can you remember?
I certainly can.
Yeah.
Yes, it was, well, how can I put it? Of course, I was so, there was 18 or 19 years between my eldest brother and myself. So of course by that time Dudley had
was well established. Really,
well established, yes. He probably he worked in Wellington for some time and then came back to Nelson. But yes, I can remember Dudley with he played rugby because I can remember him one morning I went out into the kitchen and he had this terrible, terrible black eye. And I was terrified of him. I've never seen anything like that, you see. So I would have only probably been about 3.
Yeah, okay.
Yes. And the other brothers, there was, of course, Leon. I don't remember a lot about Leon really in his youth, of course, but he went off to war, and he was away for probably about 3 years and came home.
So was there an expectation that everybody worked in the gardens after school and during the weekend? Or?
Oh yes, yes, you all had to pull your weight and pitch in and do what you could to help. But and we were all. I don't think we argued about it. We just all had to get in and do our bit. Yeah. Really.
So how did your dad meet your mum?
Oh, that's long story.
Yeah.
But yes, she was going to the movies with her girlfriend at the time, and yes, Ivy Barberini was her name.
Okay.
And so Dad went along, actually, with Mrs. Barberini, Ivy Barberini, and at the end of it, Dad decided that he actually liked Mother a lot better than Ivy Barberini, and she got the push, and Mum came on scene. Yes.
I have a copy of that book called Pastor Prayers and Promise, which has a very interesting chapter on Frank and May's life.
Yes.
And the part that really intrigued me was that May was very staunch about remaining with her own Church of Christ faith, which was highly unusual in those times, whereby if one married a Catholic, there was the expectation that you naturally converted to the Catholic faith. So your mum was a very much strong, secure person in her own right.
Absolutely.
But then sadly your dad was excommunicated from the Catholic Church for many years, but he was let back into
the church, and it made a terrific difference to his life.
Once they received him back
he was overjoyed
was he?
to get back. And of course Anthony was a Catholic because he turned for his wife, and he'd come for Dad on a Sunday morning, and off they'd go, and my mother was ever so relieved. She thought it was wonderful that he was able to get back into the faith that he had, but she stayed staunch. And we were all brought up Protestant, you see. It was just that Anthony had turned for his wife.
Yeah.
So, yes.
Philip, it was noted in later years that your grandfather cut an imposing figure with a mop of curly hair, pipe permanently in his mouth, and often seen riding a ballooned tyre bike around town. Is this how you remember him, or can you recall what your earliest memories are of your grandparents?
Yeah. Definitely one of the earliest memories was Bigger Frank, as they called him, sitting in his he had a big armchair in the corner of the dining room area, and at night time after dinner he would sit in there and have his routine or his practice of lighting up the pipe.
Yeah.
And as kids it was that first, when the tobacco's first lit, and it was something I think a lot of the grandchildren will remember, because it was actually quite a pleasant smell actually. Just the tobacco with the pipe smell was great. So we always remember Granddad lighting up the pipe, and we'd sort of climb up onto the armchair to kiss him good night before we headed home. And it was always that tobacco smell and stuff. So that's one of the memories. The other memory I have is that May, obviously Granddad's first language was Italian, so he could speak a little bit of English, but obviously he couldn't read English, so May would read the newspaper to him on a daily basis, which was her way of keeping Frank up with the current events and keeping him, you know, up to date with things.
Cover to cover.
Yeah, so, and we'd often, I know Mum and Dad would take them out for Sunday drives in the afternoon, and they had a lovely old green Mark 1 Zephyr. And I always remember trying to fix Grandad into the back seat, and of course in those days, and even into the 60s, they were still wearing the hat. You know, all the gentlemen went out with a hat, and so someone would be sort of holding the hat and trying to squeeze Frank into this tiny little. Now when you think about the Mark 1 Zephyrs now, they were actually quite a small car. They weren't a big car at all. So those were some of the memories of Frank. And
Mum sold her grandma's house in Collingwood Street, which is where the supermarket is now. Yes, Mother had a house there that had been left to her from her mother.
Okay.
And that bought the Zephyr. she sold the house and got the Zephyr.
Did he learn how to write English? Read
I
English?
don't know. I think Nana signed all the cheques.
He could only sign his name if he had to. And he didn't write. No. Didn't read or write. And everything that came out of that paper was so vital to him to know what exactly was going out.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yes.
So where did the love of rugby come from with Frank? Because
I'm not sure, but it must have come through the sons, did it? With the sons getting involved in rugby. Is that right, Mum?
Yeah. So he didn't follow up prior to that?
I don't know.
No,
Was it with Dudley getting involved, probably?
I don't know. I should know that. But poor Dudley, yes, he was the first one probably. They all got involved. There was Fisher and
according to the book, I'm butting in here, sorry. According to the book documenting the first 100 years of the Nelson Rugby Football Club, it's in 1938 that the Gargiulo name is first mentioned, that being Dudley, who was 22 years old, Anton would have been 17, Leon 15 and Lick 13. So by the time you were old enough to be aware that rugby was the holy grail of all sports in your family, can you remember what a typical Saturday was like? Did everyone go and watch your brothers play?
Well, no, everyone that could went, yes. Mum never went, ever. But, yes, I don't think, and my sisters went off to sport and I went off to ballet, but when there were big games on, you know, or when we could, the family was well represented, I can tell you that, yes. But Mum never went, ever. Which was a shame, really. She posed for the photo.
Which brings me to my next statement is I want to skip forward a few years to this photo, which is taken in 1953 in front of the newly built club rooms of the winning senior team and their supporters, which includes you, your parents, two of your sisters, a future sister-in-law, Mary Brett, who married Lick, brother Dudley, and Lick and Leon as players. So you can remember when it was taken?
Yes, definitely. Yes, I remember that one well.
We'll just
yes, I can.
Cut. Oh, sorry. Okay, so this photo was taken in 1953, as Caterina and I were just mentioning, and Philip is just going to go through and point out some of the people that he knows from the family, and maybe some others that you recognise, Philip. So if you look at the supporters at the back,
there's Mary, Auntie Mary Brett at the back. And obviously there's, in the middle here is Mick Kinzard, actually, who was the legendary coach of the Nelson Rep teams as well. My mother, Caterina, her sister, Rosina, her other sister Clementina in the back, and of course May on the end.
There's your mum, and there's
Yeah.
your...
There's Grandad and Uncle Dudley. Dudley
there.
next to Grandad. And obviously there's Leon.
That's right,
And in between Leon and there's Lick, obviously Ricardo, Calvi. And in between I noticed there's Peter Edwards, who was a great cricket coach, a great first 5'8" as well for the
one there.
Nelson Rugby Club.
So there's the two Wright brothers.
Yeah, there's
Trevor.
Keith here, I think that's Keith, and Trevor in the front row. You'll know some others too, Barbara.
Bart.
Oh, yes,
Barton,
Noel.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
Dilly Damon will be there somewhere.
Yep, there he is there.
Yeah, there's
Yep.
Dilly.
Here's Dudley, yeah. And Terry Phillips.
Oh, Terry, of course, yeah.
So,
Phillips is there.
So, Mum, you might know some others there of you.
Bill Marshall.
oh, is he? Oh, he is too. There he is there. Bill Marshall.
Is there a Bill
Yeah.
Black there somewhere?
They're bound to be.
Joe
Peter
Aiden.
Edwards.
Yep.
The Wright, you've mentioned the Wright brothers.
Mm.
Okay. Bill Black, yes.
Caterina, were you involved at all in any way when the club was fundraising to build the new club rooms?
Well, only on a Monday night when all the well, several club members would come to Hardy Street, and we'd all sit around the big kitchen table and do scorecards for the game the following week, and it was quite a lot of us. There would have probably been about 8 around that table, and yes, I should be able to remember the names of the people who came, and it was a great time that we had together anyhow doing them, and they would sell take them to practice, I guess, and they'd give each player so many of these tickets, and they had to sell them, and of course the person who held the winning ticket must have got a nice prize at the end of it. But in other ways, I mean, the members of the club worked so hard to get that club
rooms up and running.
going. Yes, carpenters, plumbers, painters, anybody who had a trade of any sort, they all just threw themselves into it and worked amazingly, really. It was a wonderful effort. Because they would all have jobs, so they must have done it all in their spare time. And so it was a great occasion, the morning that it opened, or the day that it opened, really, because it was a big effort that everybody had made.
So these tickets, what did you actually, you put this
Well, you just,
scores
yes,
on
it was
it or
just
something?
like a piece of cardboard.
Yes,
Cardboard it was, it's very fine cardboard. And these scores were put in, you'd fold it up into halves and then into quarters. They were about that big things and take away. So obviously, but they were all dished out at practice, and the boys had to take them home and get them sold. But I guess there were other ways that they had to raise money too, but that was the only one that I sort of could remember. Yes.
Philip, before I ask you about how you remember your 4 Gargiulo uncles as rugby players and individuals, I just want to mention to everyone that all 4 brothers contributed outstandingly to the club over many decades, from being players to coaching in all grades, being vice presidents, club captains, custodians, delegates and executives, which culminated in all 4 of them receiving life memberships. So let's begin with Dudley. What do you remember? We'll start with Dudley anyway.
Yeah, again, as I might have said, obviously I was a lot younger, and by the time I was old enough to sort of know my uncles,
They'd finished playing.
They'd finished playing, and they were actually quite advanced in years. But I do remember Dudley Dudley was always a hard-working man, and obviously his life was work. He would get up and he would work till the sun went down, basically, pretty much. And but apart from being hard-working, he was one of the most compassionate men I think I came across growing up. And he would help anyone and everyone. If someone turned up at the doorstep, Uncle Dudley would give them the last crust of bread. That was the kind of guy Uncle Dudley was. And I remember having, when I first went down to university in the 70s, that he would be the one. He'd drive me home late at night, you know, when he didn't have to, but he was that sort of person. And yeah, and obviously he was involved with the railways too, and was involved in that demonstration in the 1950s to keep the railway in Nelson. And he was working for the railways as a train guard at that time. Uncle Leon, I did have the pleasure of working for Uncle Leon one summer in the garden. I was quite young, probably in the third form or in those days, where I'd get up in the morning, get to work at about 6 o'clock, do a bit of picking or whatever in the glass houses. And then Uncle Leon would say, right, up to the old homestead, and he'd cook breakfast every morning, eggs on toast and a cup of tea. Still remember it, nice and simple but very effective, did the job. And I think Uncle Leon, he I guess the nephews, we sort of saw him as the cool uncle, sort of the style meister, and he had a very dry sense of humour, and when I look at the rugby photos he was in, I can just imagine him being raw, hard-boned player, don't mess with me kind of guy. Uncle Leon, and then of course Uncle Tony Ant was again that hard working, that hard working ethic that came, ethos that came through from the family. And you had he was always fully involved in the club, as you said. He was just about had every role, didn't he, in the club. And I think I remember Uncle Tony, he did coach one of our 8th grade teams or 7th grade teams, and I remember running around the backfield of Lancaster, Trafalgar Park, in my dreams, and going through the routine. So Uncle Tony was always there involved, but he, Mum will concur with me on this one, he loved sitting around the family table or the dinner table talking rugby, and I think that's where I developed that love of, you know, you don't only watch the game, you dissect it, you talk about it, you analyse it. And Uncle Tony always had this ability to smash the it was his way of communicating. So you'd have to clear the furniture out of the way in case the cups and saucers came flying off the table.
The Italian temperament.
Yeah, that's right. And the hands would go flying. Unfortunately, I was when Uncle Lick died, obviously I don't have any memories of Uncle Lick, and that always saddens me and many others, obviously, because I think today Uncle Lick would have been one that people would have described of having, to use the Maori word, mana. He had the respect of players, people, his colleagues, and he would have been very successful in whatever he did, and he was, particularly in the rugby field. And I guess it's just sad that Uncle Lick didn't stay around longer for us all to enjoy the wonderful person he was. And so that, as sportsmen, I didn't see them play, obviously, but I do remember. Just on their sports achievements, I remember Uncle Tony and Uncle Leon on the bowling green. So they would, when I was a bit older in my teens and a bit older than that, of watching them at the Easter tournaments. And they were good bowlers. They won a few tournaments, didn't they, Mum, over the years? And I think Uncle Lick might have played bowls for a while too, or not? When
Yes, he
finished
did.
rugby.
Oh no, he played bowls.
Yeah, so that was in the blood with the bowling as well, playing for the Mai Tai club in those days. Yeah.
So Caterina, out of all your brothers, and because the age gap is less, I would guess that you would have been closer to Lick
Very.
than the others. So tell me, how did he get his nickname from his given name, Calvi Ricardo?
Ah, well, his good mate, the Snows, lived next door. And of course they played together from probably 2 or 3 years old. And he couldn't say Ricardo. He could just not get his tongue around that. So he called him Lick. And that stuck for the whole of his life.
That was it.
Yes. There was no changing it, and everybody called him Lick. My mother never called him Lick, she always called him Ricardo, and she never changed.
Because I've only ever heard Lick and doing a bit of research on your family.
Yes.
It was the first time I realised that his actual name is Calvi Ricardo.
Calvi Ricardo, yes.
So you would have been very shocked and shattered along with everyone else in the family when Lick suddenly passed away with peritonitis in 1963. So what do you remember of this tragedy at the time?
I remember it well. It's something you'd never forget. I was at home with my parents then, just 10 days before Lick died. I'd had a stillborn baby.
Right.
And I was pretty fragile. And of course, poor old, got the call from the hospital that things were getting worse by the moment, and Mum and Dad were called to the hospital, but my dad could not face it at all, and Mother took off, she went, and poor old Dad, he just laid on the bed and sobbed and sobbed. So Mum stayed with Lick, and naturally, and it was a horrible time really. At the end of it, poor Lick, he passed away, and Mother collapsed, and she went to hospital, and they had to take her into the hospital, and she never made it to his funeral.
Oh, really?
Yes, really. It was so sad.
Yeah.
It was terrible. And then of course, I remember the funeral, which that was devastating. Remember being in the, in those days they sent the undertaker would come with big, lovely, big flash car, pick up the relatives, and I was in the car, and I had Calvi, Frank, little Frank, on one side of me, and Leon on the other side, and we got as far as Day's Corner, which is Vanguard Street, and we turned into the Vanguard Street, and the crowd that was standing on the footpath, all these rugby players, come from miles. It's just such a crowd of them. So I burst into tears, and Leon said, "That's enough of that." And I told Mum about it afterwards, because I felt, he shouldn't have done that. And she said, "Caterina, he only did that because he was scared of crying himself." So she said, but that was probably one of the worst days of my life, really. But the rugby players, the graveside was just, they were amazing. Those boys around that grave, and I just, you just don't forget about it, really.
No.
You don't forget about it, but he certainly had a huge crowd of people there. I guess from other walks of life, and I mean we have big families, and yes, but it was a sorry day for a lot of people, and you know, being left with 4 little kids, it's not fun, is it? Really.
Well, his memory still pretty much lives on, you know, through his kids, and it's still very much part of the football club. And
absolutely.
But yeah, just you know, because I don't remember him at all.
No.
I don't. I remember my husband's brother Des when he died in 1961 or 62. But I don't remember Luke. Yeah, I'd have to go under a hypnosis to remember him. But I remember the other, you know, Leon and Ant.
Yes, of course they would have been around for longer.
I want to very much to include and ask you to talk a little about your sisters, 2 of whom passed away at a very young age before you were born. Faith in 1928 and Patience in 1931, and then Clementina in 1970 at 36 years after a long illness. So we're just going to have a look at another family photo. In fact, we might look at 2 family photos. Okay, so this photo was taken in 1955, the year I was born. So this sister here, which one's?
Rosina.
That's Rosina.
Maria, Mary. That's Caterina.
That's you. And
Clementina.
so Clementina, she was the one that became a Salvation...
She was a Salvation Army officer.
Yeah.
And so was Mary.
Oh, okay, 2 of them were...
Once, yes, but she came out of the army and to get married. And I remember that day was a great day, really, because my sister Mary had been married for 7 years and longed for a child.
Okay, yeah.
And it didn't happen for her, but it did in the end after 7 years, and that was the day of her son's christening.
Oh, okay.
Yes. So we'd all got together for that big day.
So this is a really great family photo. So here's Anton.
Yes.
That's Dudley. So he's
a big man.
He was a big man too, wasn't he?
Yes.
And here's Lick.
Yes.
And here's Leon. So we'll just have a look at this photo that I have here also of. I'll just take that one away.
Yes.
Now this photo was taken at we think in 1948 of Frank, Frank, and it was at the 80th Jubilee celebrations for the Nelson Rugby Football Club. So here's Anton, Dudley, Leon and Lick. Gosh, they very much are Gargiulos, aren't they?
Aren't they just? Yes, they are. Right.
Okay, Caterina, tell me how you met your husband, Peter Marshall.
Well, December it was, and the telegram boy used to come with they'd send the tomatoes away.
Yeah.
And they would send back the prices that they had got for them by telegram. And of course, the telegram boy came to our house, and he had told Peter about this good-looking girl that was staying up at the Gargiulos, and he said, I think on Christmas Eve we'll go out and we'll look for her. And so we actually got into town, and she was actually a stepdaughter of my sister's.
Okay.
And we got into town, and well, we were just walking up Trafalgar Street, and along came Peter and his mate Brian Bond, and and said to Peter, well, I'm having her, you can have the other one, and I was the other one.
And the rest was history.
And the rest was history. He couldn't stand, Leslie couldn't stand Brian. Oh,
Paulie, sorry.
it wasn't her cup of tea,
Yeah,
and
just-
of course Peter and I just, yeah,
That was
clicked straight away.
That was the beginning.
That was the beginning, yes. Yeah, that was...
So Peter played for Celtic.
Yes.
So what was it like when Peter played against his brother-in-law Lick? How did that go
There was
down?
always great competition there, yes, and there was this one game that Peter told me about, and of course Lick on the back of the scrum and Peter halfback for Celtic. He got hold of Peter and he rubbed his nose into the ground and said, "How do you like that, Marsh?"
Welcome to the family.
Welcome to the family. Yes.
Anyway, you went on to have 4 children.
Yes.
Cecilia, Philip here of course,
Yes.
Elizabeth, who's known as Biddy, and Juliet, who have provided you with grandchildren and great-grandchildren
Yes.
now. Philip, tell me, how did it come about that you joined the Nelson Club instead of Celtic?
Well, at the time, I don't think Celtic had a team in the grade. I was itching to play rugby, and Celtic didn't have a team, and I think I ended up going down with my best mate Billy Phillips, and we ended up signing up for Nelson. And I think at that time too, all of our mates were all of our schoolmates from Victory School or and subsequently Nelson Intermediate were in the Nelson Club. And of course the St. Joe's boys all ended up in the Celtic team. So, and I think at the time Dad was okay with it, and I think he was just pleased I was playing rugby and playing somewhere, and knew how much I wanted to get out onto the rugby field. So that was how it pretty much started. Yeah.
So how old were you then?
I
You would
was
have been
probably about 9 or 10.
Okay.
Would have you been?
Yeah, I think I can remember playing in the 8th grade teams, in the 7th grade teams, and then the under 15s. So, and at that time, I think Nelson Club probably had a couple of teams in each grade for
You were
for
very
those
late
teams.
home that day.
Yes, I was late home that day, and
But you'd
Yeah.
walked.
yeah, I think I'd walked to the club room. So that's quite interesting. Yeah.
What position did you sort of specialise in?
I wasn't very big, as your brother Peter Bryden wanted to. And so, I was always halfback. That was Dad's position, and I guess during growing up, I'd hear Dad talking about halfback, what the halfback does, little micro skills,
Yeah.
and all through the year, and as time goes, when I watch rugby, I'm just watching it from the halfback's position. So I view the game as what's he doing, and so halfback was my position.
So who were your coaches through the years?
It's interesting when I knew I was going to be asked this question. I had lots of coaches. I mentioned Uncle Tony before. I think Jimmy Black might have been involved in a team. Ron Wall, maybe the hooker that played for the club.
Yes.
Obviously, my father actually coached one of the Nelson Rugby Club teams as well. So that's worth mentioning because the way he felt, he was supporting rugby and helping develop rugby players. But I guess two coaches who had a big influence on me didn't actually coach me in rugby. They were 2 cricket coaches who actually had an involvement in the Nelson Rugby Club.
Okay.
And that was actually John Goodman
Yeah. Okay.
and Peter Edwards. So Peter Edwards was obviously we saw him in that photograph, was a great 5'8" in the 50s, and a wonderful cricket coach,
Okay.
and obviously John Goodman played as well. Played a lot of did a lot of coaching, and those two coaches had a big influence on the way I perceived the game.
So during your playing days with the club, were there any players that you played alongside with that went on to achieve higher honours in the game at all?
Higher honours. Well, some went on to have good careers in club rugby. I can't think of any specifically. I remember really good sportsmen who were involved in even in the younger teams that I played and who went on to have sports careers of note. And I mentioned Brent Wright. I didn't play a lot with Brent, but Brent obviously became a wonderful basketball player. He was one of the most well balanced players. He always seemed to have lots of time. And in the teams, I'll mention Bill Phillips too, because my good mate Bill, because at a very tender age, he was only in Standard 4, he won the Nelson Rugby Club Cup on the field days they have for the kicking, the sprinting, the line kicking and the goal kicking. An amazing achievement for one so young, competing against all of the others.
That's right.
And Billy was a natural sportsman and he ended up after that under 15 side going on to play volleyball. There were a lot of good players. Donald Fry was very talented with those early teams. Brandon Sparrow, and there was a young player, and obviously Scruff Edwards. Your brother Peter, did I mention Peter just before? We always liked having Peter around because we knew we were going to get line out ball, and that was really important. And of course I was lucky to play with most of my cousins, so Michael Garge, Uncle Tony's son, Tony Garge, Stephen Garge, and John Garge, and a little bit with Paul as well. So yeah.
In fact, what we'll do is we'll have a look at a couple of your rugby photos.
Okay.
If we just get Brian to... Okay, so this photo was is the under 15 team in 1972, the Nelson Rugby Football Club, and we'll go through some of the players here.
In the back row, we had these four guys at the back. Were all very formidable players, and obviously there's John Ray. He was big and strong. Your brother Peter Bryden, a lot of line out ball. Bill Phillips again was won a lot of line out ball, and Brandon Sparrow was a very good loose forward who went on to play for Nelson College as well, and a very good player. My cousin Michael Gargiulo in the middle here was a very strong prop. I think he played prop at the time. And there were a lot of talented sportsmen in here. There was Greg Scott, who I played cricket with as well, was a good inside back. Donald Fry was a very good hooker. I think he went on to higher honours for the Nelson Rugby Union. Terry Hodgson there was the star of the team, scored a lot of tries. Gary Homewood lived down the road from us in Matapo Terrace there. He was a good hard-working forward. And of course Jimmy Black was our manager, and his son Jimmy Jr. Jim was a very good centre three-quarter. I think Scruff was first five. During that I was at halfback, and I think Scruff was at first five, as much as I can remember. Obviously Dick's son Paul Weechin in the front row, a very good club player. And of course and he was DK Hughes, David Hughes, who I went on to play with at Nelson College as well. Very good wing three-quarter. So it was a very good team. David Todd there. It was just a very good team. And obviously the record speaks for itself.
Played 9 and won 9. So
obviously, sorry, Barb. I would like to mention. Obviously, there's Dilly Damon there, and when you talked about coaches, I do have fond memories of Keith Edwards. Now, Keith Edwards was a very good prop for Nelson Bays. When Nelson Bays Union was first formed, I think Keith Edwards was one of the first props in that side. And I stand to be corrected. I think he played for Waimea Old Boys. I'm not sure about that. I stand to be corrected, but a hell of a nice man, a good coach and a good person.
So we'll go to this one here, which is in 1982. The junior first team, championship winners.
Yeah.
So do you want to just sort of pick out?
I think I was really pleased to be able to play with my cousin John Gargiulo and my cousins John and Stephen, because I'd never played rugby with those two at all because of a difference in ages. And John was a great captain. He was one of those guys where if you're going into battle, you'd go in with John. And he was, again, Uncle Leon's son, hard-nosed, really fit, and would play for 80 minutes. Stephen was a very good prop in that side. We had a good team, and we played as a team. Other players, I remember Marty Hammond. Marty was a very good goal kicker, very good fullback, and a great guy. And there was some, Simon Parle in the back row. I think he went on to play some senior rugby.
Oh, that's
Simon's in the back there,
for goodness sake.
And Wayne Manson, who played in through the grades. Obviously Don's in the back row there. Our coach was Joe Hayes, and the other person I'd like to make mention of in this photo is Calvin Cochrane, who as a kid I remember he captained Nelson Bays in about 1969, 1970. He came up from Canterbury. Wonderful loose forward, hard-nosed player as well, no-nonsense player, and I respected him. And of course we had Joe Hayes as the coach, and Joe's still heavily involved in the club, and a very good club supporter.
So finally, we're just going to throw this one in the mix.
Yeah.
So this is actually a basketball team, but it's but their name was, they played under the name of Nelson Rugby Football Club.
Correct.
Most constructive boys team,
that's right.
whatever that means.
That must have been we lost.
So we have little Philip here.
Yeah, little me. Yeah.
And there's my brother Pete.
Your brother Peter, yeah.
And there's Donald Fry.
Yep.
Bill
Phillips, yeah.
And he's an old
Grant
Priest. Grant
yep,
Priest.
from across the road.
And Alan Batchelor and Peter Batchelor. They're actually related to my husband.
Oh, okay. And can I make a special mention, because I think with Nelson Rugby Club there were links all over the place, and of course as kids we would go to Trevor Wright's place at the end of Vanguard Street, and he had this big concrete pad with the basketball hoop, and we would do layups for hours and hours, shoot baskets. And I would go home to mum and dad, and mum would say, "Philip, you've worn another hole in the foot that you drag." And sometimes we'd go from Trevor's place, and Bill Phillips, my good mate Bill, lived up on Jenner Road, and then we'd go to Keith's place on top of Jenner Road and shoot more baskets. And of course his son Greg was a very good player for the Nelson Rugby Club as well. So I think in those days it was great because, and you'll know this very well, we were encouraged to play, it's what they're trying to do in New Zealand now, we were encouraged to play all kinds of sports. And basketball was Friday night, rugby was Saturday morning. And
Okay, Philip, tell us about the family connection your dad has through the Nelson Rugby Football Club.
In the 1930s, Dad's family all lived in Elliott Street, and so the Trafalgar Park was a bit of a playground for Dad as he got older and playing rugby. But obviously the uncles, he lived with his uncles there in Elliott Street, and two of those uncles in particular represented Nelson, the Nelson Union and the Nelson Club, in the early to mid 1930s. And I'd like to talk about Stan Stewart, who was a wonderful first 5'8" for the Nelson Club in the years 1931 to 1934. In fact, he played for the Nelson Club third grade and junior grades before those years. And Stan, he was just a very, very good player from what I've heard. And I know people like Bill Reid, who obviously was in the club, had a great deal of respect for Stan's ability. and obviously I think it was in an era, I think they had the Seddon Shield for a time during some of those years. I know they won it way back in 1922. And I think I'd like to point out for club aficionados that up until when Nelson Bays was formed, Stan, my father's uncle, was the second highest scorer for the Nelson Rugby Union and point scorer, even though he played for a very short time from 1931 to 1934, and he was only bettered by Bill Reid, who played for, I think he played for 20 years or something for the Nelson representative team. And so in a very short time he scored a phenomenal number of tries and conversions and penalty goals in an era where try scoring wasn't that prolific, I guess. So, and the other uncle was Francis Stewart, who was a fast wing 3/4, and I think there's a little article in that in our Nelson Centenary book about when they did win one of those Seddon Shield games, with a combination of a Stan Stewart kick through to either Bill Reid or Francis Stewart to score one of the winning tries. And so I had another uncle called Lawrence, who played in a 3rd grade championship club side too. So Dad, there was that connection with the rugby club, with the Nelson Club, and
yes.
never knew that. Yeah,
and never. I think he went to Celtic, I guess, because he was at the convent.
At St. Joseph.
Yes, St. Joseph.
And I recall, Mum and I were talking about this the other day, Stan came back for the 1970 centenary celebration, and he had a marvellous time meeting up with all of those players, the Bill Reids and so on of his era. And it's interesting to know, and I know you were telling Hoddy about this with the two of Stan Stewart's sons. Bernard ended up playing for the junior All Blacks and for Canterbury, and he was a first 5'8" again. All these 5'8s like Merrin. And another son, his oldest son Campbell, ended up playing for Wellington with the Nev McEwens, the great Wellington sides of the early 60s. So talented sportsman, and he produced some wonderful rugby players as well. So
good sporting genes.
I guess
gets passed down.
Yeah.
So you also said that Stan scored a double century in a Hawke Cup cricket in the 1930s.
Again, I stand to be corrected because I might be getting mixed up with Mick Kinzett.
Oh, okay.
So anyone out there, please let Barbara know, because I think I heard that Mick Kinzett, the wonderful coach, and I know Dad had a lot of respect, and Dilly Damon for Mick Kinzett, a lot of people. I may have misheard that it was actually Mick Kinzett that may have been a good cricketer back in the 1930s.
Okay.
So I'm sorry if that's wrong, but I hope my Uncle Stan scored a double century.
Okay, well, so we're going to look at a photo of Stan and his brother in the 1930s. Yeah. Okay, so this is a photo of the Nelson Rugby Football Club. It's the senior championship winners in 1932. So Philip can just point out 3 or 4 notable players there.
So obviously my great uncle Stan in the second row there, and of course a lot of people who will see Stan here will see some likeness with my father Peter. It's, again, not very big though, slight of stature, but incredibly skillful. And his brother Francis Stewart, or Ginger, in the back row, a wing 3/4, and both represented Nelson, as I said, for those 3 or 4 years. And of course some wonderful players on this side. Obviously the legendary Bill Reid as captain, and F.H. McLean played for many years and served the club in many other capacities as well. And of course Tinker, Roy Phillips here in the middle row, my best mate Bill's grandfather. So it was a good side. They had some very good sides in that 1930s era.
And just to sort of go over again with Tinker, him and his son Terry, which is Bill's dad, built the club rooms.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, Roy and Terry was a great builder and obviously a great hooker, and so some of these players produced other good players. So Terry, obviously a legendary life member of the club and a wonderful all-round sportsman too. Yeah. True.
Philip, did you ever get the opportunity to actually see your father play?
Unfortunately not. Dad retired probably prematurely because of a serious injury. Fortunately, my cousin Tony Gargiulo, Uncle Lick's son Tony, who was a big influence on me growing up. You know, he had a passion for rugby and sport, and spent many happy hours playing with Tony in Niles Street and Auntie Mary's, and would have liked to have played more rugby with Tony, but it didn't happen because of the age difference. But Tony managed to get hold of a DVD with some film footage of the Nelson teams from the 1950s.
Okay.
A gentleman, I think, that lived next to Mary Garge, Uncle Lick's house, actually took some film reels of Seton Shield parades, matches on Trafalgar Park. There was a match between the 61 French, so there's awesome footage. And there was a game between West Coast and Nelson, a Seton Shield game, and there's footage of Dad at halfback with Dilly Damon at first 5'8". So I did manage to see that footage, which was great, and so I'm really grateful for Tony for giving me a copy of that DVD. The only thing, I've heard lots of complimentary remarks about Dad's halfback, ability and what a good player he was, and a lot about that Ramfurly Shield challenge against Taranaki in 1959, where they gave Taranaki a really good run for their money, until unfortunately Dad went off at half time, and the game changed. Apparently that's what rugby people tell me, and that's what we've heard over the years.
Never said that.
No, Dad never said it, but a lot of other people said it.
I know that, but he didn't like people saying it either.
Yeah, and
quite a humble man.
He was a humble
man. And of course Stuart Damon's father, Dilly Knoll, I think he and Dad had a very good combination. Under
going back as far as school
under Mick Kinsett's coaching and other people, and I think for me the thing about Dad is he was a great analyst of the game, and I think he and others at that time were probably looking at micro skills before other coaches may have picked up on things like that. So I remember just as a kid, Dad would have me with technique, passing, all of those things, kicking both feet from a very early age, blindside play, all of that stuff. So in those days when another book that was influential was Ron Jardin's book on rugby. There were certain books we read as kids, but Dad I always loved to watch with Dad, because he'd say something, wouldn't he? He'd be spot on with the summation of the game, and then something would happen 5 minutes later, and Dad would just smile. This was coming, and so ability to read the game, and I guess that was probably one of his strengths as a player, which I didn't unfortunately see a lot of.
What did he think of Graham Henry's coaching? Because he was very analytical. I've been reading his book actually just recently, and
I'm not sure about Graham Henry. I think I've got a feeling Dad might have been more praiseworthy of the kind of Fred Allen coaching. The teams in the 60s where they used the ball, they used the blind side, they ran. I think although Dad and Dilly kicked a lot, I think he might have been more in Fred Allen's camp with some of the coaches. not saying that Graham Henry wasn't,
No.
but I think tactically,
Yeah.
I think he would have been more affiliated with the Wayne Smiths
Okay.
of the world, I suspect.
Finally, a question for both of you. Apart from the extended Gargiulo families, what other families do you remember well in those early
I've got a list of
years that were a big part of the club dynamics?
Is that camera on?
Yeah, it is. Would you like your? Where's your notes? We can let the camera roll.
Well, I haven't got the list here, that's the trouble, but
Oh, is your list over there, Mum, is it?
Do you want to just?
Is that it?
Bill Reid, his property actually backed onto our property.
Yeah.
So we knew Bill
Really well.